What do a towel, a shipping crate, and a series of wives have in common? You're about to find out on this episode of Forgotten Felonies.
Welcome back to Forgotten Felonies. I'm Monica.
And I'm Olivia.
And this is where we take you back in time to rediscover the tales of vintage villainy that time forgot. In our last episode, we heard the story of Jesse McClure, who wound up killing his two very small children in Indiana in 1903, and that his wife had been the real target he was after. He was unsuccessful in his attempt to kill Sarah, but we also found out that Jesse McClure had been poring over the confessions of a man named Alfred Andrew Knapp, who had been arrested in Hamilton, Ohio, back in February of 1903. I had Olivia look into that case so she could briefly tell us about it in the episode, but what she said to me was,
he needs his own episode.
And so it made perfect sense to cover Alfred Knapp next. Olivia, tell us things about Alfred.
Alfred Andrew Knapp was born in Terre Haute, Indiana, sometime in 1863. He was the son of Cyrus and Susanna Knapp. Last episode, I said he had one sister, but in doing more research, I found that he is the second of 5 children. He had an older sister, Martha, and 3 younger siblings, Mary Adeline, who went by Mamie, Sarah, who went by Sadie, and Cyrus Matthew. Alfred grew up in Indiana, and according to the 1880 Indiana census, he worked as a laborer while still living at home with his parents and siblings. He lived in Indiana until at least 1894, where I found him in Ohio, and then he moved back to Indiana in 1903.
And with that out of the way, let's take a walk back through time to March 2nd of 1903. George Pusley was standing near the bow of the steamship Bellevue on the Ohio River. As it was turning toward the wharf for landing in New Albany, Indiana, he noticed a white object bobbing up and down in the water. George called out to fellow deckhands Albert Rusk and Marion Scott. When the 3 men realized it was a body floating face down, one of them ran to notify Captain Steve Green. A small boat was lowered to the surface of the water, and the body was approached. She was floating face down with her shoulders and legs submerged. There was no hair left on her head, and the white object bobbing up and down was the back of her skull. One brave soul tied rope around the arm of the deceased woman, and then she was towed over to the landing. A man by the name of George B. Schrader removed the body from the water, and Coroner W.L. Starr arrived to view the remains. Of course, they would have to wait until the body had been officially identified, but everybody had a strong suspicion as to who this woman was. Her pictures had been printed in the papers throughout Ohio, Indiana, and the rest of the country. This was most certainly Hannah Goddard Knapp, who had been strangled to death on December 22, 1902, and had then been dumped at a location in the Great Miami River 2 miles south of Hamilton, Ohio. Her body had traveled more than 150 miles through the Great Miami River, into the Ohio River, and down the Falls of the Ohio, just above the wharf where she was found. The law enforcement officers in Hamilton, Ohio were contacted immediately. They had their confessed murderer behind bars already. They just needed the body to prosecute the crime, and now they had it. By the time Hannah Knapp was pulled from the river at New Albany, Alfred Knapp had already confessed to murdering her, but back in December of 1902, nobody yet knew that Hannah was dead. They only knew that she was gone. Christmas was coming, and Alfred Knapp's sister, Mary King, and her husband, Edward, had invited Alfred and Hannah to spend the holiday with them over in the Cumminsville neighborhood of Cincinnati.
Hannah B. Goddard was born in Hamilton, Ohio, but she was orphaned at an early age and went to Cincinnati. She found a job in a candy factory, and that's where she met Mary Knapp King.
Mary and Hannah had been best friends for years. They had met when they were co-workers many years back, and they became such good friends that Mary and Edward eventually had Hannah move in with them. This was actually how Hannah met Mary's brother, Alfred. Now, Alfred had several siblings, like Olivia said, but Mary was the sister with whom he was the closest. That December of 1902, Alfred hadn't been working much, and there was no money to pay for the train ride to go the 34.5 miles from Hamilton to Cincinnati. Hannah sent a letter to Mary on December 19th, which said,
"We cannot come to your house for Christmas dinner. As Allie is not working, we have not the money to come. He is sick and is suffering from those terrible headaches."
And it's true that they really were hurting for money. The couple had moved to Hamilton, Ohio just a few months before and stayed with Hannah's uncle, Charlie Goddard, at 419 Sycamore Alley. They soon found a place of their own, kind of, renting out a room at the home of Charles Dattilo. It was located at 339 South 4th Street, and I believe it was a rooming house, but Charles Dattilo and his wife also lived there. Alfred had not been able to pay rent for several preceding months, so the debt was just mounting by the day. When Alfred was later telling Mayor Bosch about the murder, it went like this.
"Mayor, I'll tell you about it. About 5 in the morning of December 22nd, I was in a half daze. When I came to, I had her by the throat as we were lying in bed. I took both hands and pressed tighter and tighter until I saw she was dead." "Did she make any struggle?" "No. My wife was a little woman. She was 5 feet 1 inch high and weighed only 95 pounds. I didn't notice her struggle."
Interesting.
Yeah.
What sort of days are we talking about?
Well, we will learn more about this. So after this spontaneous, unplanned, and practically unconscious murder, he spent just a little bit of time figuring out how to get away with it. At 7 o'clock a.m., he left the house and went straight to Schallenberger's livery stable, where he had once been employed for a duration of 2 weeks. He rented a horse and a spring wagon, and then he went on a quest to find something to put the body in.
"Then what did you do?" "I went uptown to look for a box to put her in. I got a shoebox back at Gilchrist's store on High Street, paying a man 15 cents for it. I took it home and packed her in it. She only had her nightclothes and stockings on. I had to double her legs at the knees."
He stuffed some blankets and old clothes in all of the space around Hannah's body, and then he put the top of the wooden crate in place and nailed it down.
The box was heavy. I held a young man passing on 4th Street. I gave him a nickel to help me downstairs with the box. I would not know him if I saw him again. Then I got the wagon. I next drove down the river road about 2 miles from town and threw the box, with my wife in it, into a sucker hole in the river.
When he was about to throw the box into the river, a mail carrier came driving past. He hid with the box in some weeds until the mailman was gone, and then he proceeded to push the box containing Hannah right into the Great Miami River. He got back to town around 9:45 a.m., he said, and returned the horse and wagon to the livery barn. He just waited around, and then he caught the 1:15 p.m. CD&T car from Hamilton to Cincinnati.
A CD&T car would be an interurban electric rail car or a trolley on the Cincinnati, Dayton, and Toledo Traction Company line. Traction lines like this were very common around 1900 to 1915 and was one way to quickly travel to and from nearby cities before automobiles became the dominant method of travel.
He made his way straight to the home of his sister, Mary King, at number 4111 Lakeman Street in the Cumminsville neighborhood of Cincinnati. When he arrived around 4 o'clock p.m., Edward F. King was standing out by his front gate. Ed was confused because he and Mary had received that letter saying that Alfred and Hannah wouldn't be joining them for Christmas. When Ed saw Alfred approaching, he said,
"Hello, son. Where's Hannah? She hadn't been here?" "Why, no. When did she leave home?" "I got a note from her saying she was coming to town on the traction line, and I thought I would come after her. I supposed, of course, she was here." "No, she has not been here, but come in and sit down. She may come any moment."
What a good actor.
Yeah. Alfred went inside and he seemed very, very nervous. He ate dinner with them and then he sat in deep thought for a while. Now, Ed was very suspicious of this whole thing and started to wonder about one of Alfred's previous wives, Jenny. Her death had been ruled a suicide, but Ed always had his suspicions. Ed even said to Alfred that evening,
Al, I believe you've got another Jenny case on your hands.
This really shocked Alfred, and he said,
What makes you mention her name?
And then Ed said to him,
Because I believe you made way with her and Hannah too.
I'm actually surprised that Ed just called him out like that.
Yeah, well, there was a history. It was pretty intriguing. You'll see. This was the lingo in 1903 and meant that Ed thought Alfred had killed them both. Alfred insisted that Hannah had simply left and he didn't know where she could be. Alfred slept there that night, sharing a folding bed with Ed's father. He tossed and turned all night long. He stayed another 2 nights, but he opted to sleep in a chair over by the stove. In the chair when he was sleeping, he tossed and turned, and he mumbled unintelligibly in his sleep, so they couldn't tell what he was saying, but he was obviously not sleeping very restfully. On Christmas Day, he said he could tell he wasn't welcome, and he went back to Hamilton. Then he returned to the King home in Cumminsville a couple days later and told them that when he had been back in Hamilton, he had sold all of Hannah's clothes.
What did you do that for? Well, she's gone where she don't need any clothes, so I sold them.
What?
Way to admit it.
Yeah.
And that's not suspicious at all.
Yeah, if she had just left for a few days, he wouldn't have sold all of her clothes. Now, Ed and Mary were both feeling very uneasy about this disappearance. But see, that's not all he had done while he was back in Hamilton for those 2 days. Yes, he got rid of all her clothes, but some of it he gave to Mrs. Dattilo to go toward the back rent that he owed, and then money from the sales of the rest of the clothes also went toward that debt. He also got rid of their furniture. They had gone to a rent-to-own sort of place, and they were paying installments each month, but he took the furniture back and he canceled the contract. He also sold their carpets, and he even contacted Hannah's sister and told her that Hannah had gone missing and would not ever be seen again. A lot of people were asking him why he was doing all of this, and he told them things like, she won't be coming back. He also told them he was moving to Indianapolis, which is where his parents were living at the time. So around the very end of December, he went to Indianapolis. His parents were actually living in a building that had lots of different apartments in it, and I have a really cool picture. And he wound up making the acquaintance of a 19-year-old neighbor by the name of Anna Mae Gamble, otherwise known as Annie.
Yep, he sure did. Annie lived in a basement apartment with her adopted father. She had been adopted when she was about 6 or 7, and her dad was actually a military veteran. Her father, Joseph Gamble, had been widowed in 1894, which is actually the same year that Annie had been born. Joseph and his wife had 7 children together, and I'm not sure why he felt the need to adopt. Maybe he knew the parents and agreed to take her in or something.
Yeah, so the two of them meet, and 19-year-old Annie falls head over heels for this 40-year-old fellow. Now, Alfred was staying there pretty much indefinitely because he had nowhere else to be, and Annie was stuck to him like wet wallpaper. Their togetherness was very firm and fast. In January of 1903, while they were still spending all their time together, Alfred joined a Christian church as well as a group called the Christian Endeavor. And then on February 3rd, 1903, Alfred and Annie got married. Annie's father, Joseph, he was very old and frail. His mind was going. He couldn't speak clearly most of the time, and they said that he had brain problems. Annie and her father, Joseph, had been living in, that dark, awful basement apartment. The paper actually described it as a squalid basement room that used to be a paint shop. The large room is divided into 2 by a piece of old worn carpet hanging from the ceiling. Everything appeared as if it had never been swept or washed.
So it kind of seems like she saw him as her way out.
Perhaps. I know that her dad went into the hospital a lot because he was sick. And then there's a letter I saw from Alfred to her from jail saying, "How's Daddy?" But she was saying, I'm going to see if Daddy will give me his money so I can come to Ohio for your trial. So he just had his income from being a military vet, her dad. And it wasn't really a lot, but that's what they lived off of. But still, Joseph used his own money to pay for Annie and Alfred's marriage costs, and he acted as the only witness. So Annie was pleased to be moving into her own apartment with Alfred, and they actually got a room in that very same building where her father lived. Now, by this time, Alfred's parents had actually moved out of that building in Indianapolis, and they were now living with his sister, Sadie Wenzel, in Cincinnati, Ohio. And then also, it turns out that Sadie and the parents were living with little brother Cyrus and his wife and 2 kids. So they were all living in that house in Cincinnati.
And a reminder, Sadie's first name was Sarah.
Yes. Okay. Now, that house where they lived, like Sadie, the parents, and Cyrus's family, it wasn't too far from where Edward and Mary King lived. And then, reminder, Mary is Alfred's sister as well, and his favorite. So, to share the good news with his parents about his wedding, he sent them a letter. And he announced that he was, married to this 19-year-old girl that he had met just a few weeks before. Alfred's parents found this all to be very odd. Where was Hannah? Where was his wife of 9 years by this time? Why wasn't he looking for her? How could he remarry if, they didn't even know that Hannah was dead? So his father had written back to him and asked him these kinds of questions. And Alfred's reply to his father was,
Hannah has gone to heaven, where all good people belong.
On February 22nd, just under 3 weeks after their wedding, Alfred's parents, Susanna and Cyrus Knapp Sr., they showed up at the King home and asked Edward and Mary if they knew that Alfred had gotten remarried over in Indianapolis. And this was news to them. And now what looked suspicious appeared to be sinister. Now, his mom, Susanna Knapp, asked Edward if anyone had actually looked for Hannah, and that answer was no. Susanna and Cyrus Sr. both agreed that someone really ought to look into the whereabouts of their missing daughter-in-law. Alfred's family members, they were all upset about this new marriage, like right off the bat. Hannah had been very likable, and they didn't think that it was right to just replace her like this, especially if you had no idea where she was. Now, Alfred, still in Indianapolis, received letters from his sisters, Mary and Sadie, and even his mom, I believe, saying that they would never accept this marriage. It wasn't right for him to have done it. And his sister Mary was especially upset that her best friend had gone missing. Well, her brother didn't seem to care, and now he's just moved on. Edward King, Mary's husband, decided it was time to find out what happened to Hannah. On Monday, February 23rd, Hannah's uncle, Charles Goddard, showed up at the King residence. I'm not sure if they had sent him a letter or if he just came on his own, but he showed up and he talked to Ed King about Hannah. Ed asked him what he thought had become of her, and Charles said that he was firmly convinced that she had probably been thrown into the river. The next day, Tuesday, February 24th, Ed King and Charles Goddard traveled back to Hamilton, Ohio together. They were going to investigate this themselves, since, the police didn't seem to have any interest in it. Of course, they wanted to find Hannah alive somewhere in Hamilton, but the more that they learned, the more they realized that Hannah was probably not coming back. They found out about Alfred renting the horse and wagon on the morning of December 22nd. They found out that he had told the livery stable that he was going to be taking a trip to a town kind of far away, but he came back within a couple hours and could not possibly have gone where he said he was going. They learned about the sale of all of Hannah's belongings, the return of the furniture, and then his hasty move to Indianapolis. So they talked to a lot of people about, when did you last see her? And it turns out she was last seen by anyone on December 21st. So finally that evening, Ed and Charles went to the police with what evidence they had collected. And the police agreed that it was likely Alfred had probably done something to Hannah. So they contacted the officials over in Indianapolis, where Alfred was living with his new wife. It was the morning of Wednesday, February 25th, 1903, when the police arrived at the apartment that Alfred shared with Annie and took him into custody. Annie had no idea why her new husband of only 22 days was being arrested, and she was in tears. Now, Alfred assumed that he was under arrest for bigamy. And so the first thing he said to the Indianapolis officers was,
"Well, if they want to prove bigamy on me, they will have to find my wife Hannah first."
An officer responded with,
"I guess we can find her."
and he replied with,
"I guess you won't find her."
Officers from Hamilton, Ohio, made the 106-mile trip by train over to Indianapolis that day and picked up their prisoner. And by that same Wednesday night, Alfred was tucked snugly away in the Butler County Jail in Hamilton. Mayor Bosch, as well as several others, questioned him about his missing wife. It took 3.5 hours of serious interrogation, asking him about other crimes that he may have had something to do with as well. For example, about 3 months before Hannah disappeared, there had been a horrible knife attack on Stella Motzer, who was just 6 years old, and her little sister Hattie, who was 5. Stella had been cut on her head, and the bloodhounds had taken the police to the home of a gardener named Joe Roth, but he swore he was innocent. And they even got 6-year-old Stella to say that Joe might have been the man who attacked her, but she didn't seem to be entirely sure. Still, they pressed charges. He was in jail and all of that. Now, Alfred showed up at the home of the Motzers claiming to be a detective. And he had this tin badge that was obviously not real. He asked Mrs. Motzer if she would entrust the case to him. And then he told her, I'll be back tomorrow. But he said he would be in a different disguise so she wouldn't recognize him. He wouldn't look the same. So Mrs. Motzer, she was able later to identify Alfred as the fake detective that had shown up. And that raised some suspicion as to did Alfred have something to do with this? And also Alfred and Joe Roth, they looked quite similar physically. So they thought it's very possible that, 6-year-old Stella may have just been, mistaken. So the Hamilton officials brought this up, and he denied having anything to do with it. He was asked where he was at the time of the attack on the Motzer children, and he said that he'd been in that area, but he was picking up some prescriptions that had been prescribed by a Dr. Cruz. Well, the officers contacted this doctor, and he said that, he had prescribed Alfred medication, but that was months prior. It was not in September of 1902. So he's confronted with that information, and this seems to be the turning point. Alfred had been caught in a lie, and so he kind of figured, oh gosh, so things changed. And so on the night of February 25th, sitting in the jail in Hamilton, Alfred confessed to the murder of his wife, Hannah Goddard Knapp. He said that, he had been asleep and he awoke while he was doing it. And he said that she had been a wonderful woman and he had absolutely no reason to kill her. However, he still denied up and down having had anything to do with the Motzer children. So after this, full confession of the murder of Hannah Goddard, he accompanied the lawmen down River Road and showed them the spot where he had dumped the box down a really steep bank and into the river. Now, there was no sign of the box anywhere because keep in mind, she was dumped December 22nd, and then this is now, February 25th. So it's been a while. And this is when the search of the river began. So after that, he was taken back to the county jail and he was charged with first-degree murder. It was the next day, Thursday, February 26th, that Alfred let Mayor Bosch know that he had a few more things he wanted to tell him. So he was taken into Mayor Bosch's private office, and then the reality of this man's evil deeds came spilling out.
Dr. Charles Flesh Food. For the form and complexion, removing wrinkles as if by magic. One application often showing a remarkable improvement. For developing the bust or breasts shrunken from nursing. It has the highest endorsement of physicians. 2 boxes is often sufficient to make the bust firm, large, and beautiful. Sold by department stores and druggists. Regular price, $1 a box. But to all who take advantage of this special offer and send us $1, we will send 2 boxes in plain wrapper. Dr. Charles Flesh Food. For sale by May's Cut Rate Drugstore. We never close.
This lengthy and at times shocking confession was more of an entire life story. After laying it all out, Mayor Bosch contacted a few different prisons and received some records. There were many interviews with his mother and siblings. Now, I've been able to put it all together to tell you listeners all about the life and crimes of Alfred Andrew Knapp. Alfred Knapp had been born in Indiana in 1864 and was a very obedient, kind, loving little boy. But when he was 6, something truly life-altering happened to little Allie Knapp. He was kicked in the head by a colt. This kick was so severe, it left an indentation in his head for the rest of his life. I mean, even at the age of 40, you could see the shape of the horse's foot in his head. Now, he was unconscious for several days, then bedridden for a couple months, and after that, he was just never the same. He became very angry and disobedient, and he had horrible headaches and fainting spells, like for the rest of his life. And when he was still little, he would often say, "Mama, Mama, my head, my head." Well, later, at age 12, Allie fell 10 feet off of a porch and landed on his head. And this fractured his skull and left him with what doctors referred to as brain fever.
When doctors diagnosed someone with brain fever, they weren't referring to one specific modern diagnosis. Back in 1903, brain fever was a broad term people used for serious conditions involving the brain. Things like high fever, delirium, inflammation, confusion, or dramatic behavioral changes after an illness or injury. So, the medical experts at the time of the incident were saying Alfred suffered some kind of significant neurological or mental disturbance following the accident. They just didn't have the precise medical language that we have today.
Yeah, so this was also around the time that he quit going to school, this second one. The paper said that he only reached the, quote, 4th reader before stopping. But I saw something else that said he was in school up until he was 14, so I'm not entirely sure. But a couple years after this other head injury, he was actually hit in the head with a baseball bat. His sister Mary said that he would act very strangely when there was a full moon, and that it seemed like his eyes would even change colors, which, I mean, other than just really dilated pupils, I don't know how that's possible. Now, he claims that in 1881, he had been struck by lightning. He was 17 years old at this time. He said that this caused another injury to his brain. But this story, being struck by lightning, it was not verified by anyone. And Alfred was known to be quite the storyteller and embellisher, possibly due to his brain injuries. He used to make up these crazy, crazy stories, telling people, like, I have been kidnapped by circus men, or like that his parents weren't his real parents, or just any other crazy adventure that his brain conjured up. Alfred and his family, they seemed to move around a lot. He said that he lived in Illinois until he was 14, and then they moved to Madison, Indiana, where he committed his very first crime. So he had gotten a job on a steamboat, and he stole a suit of clothes from a shipmate before the ship even left the wharf. Alfred actually put on the stolen clothes, which obviously did not go unnoticed, and the authorities in Cincinnati were notified by telegraph while they were still on the water. So as soon as the boat landed, he was arrested and he was sent to the Cincinnati workhouse for a while, which is a type of prison, but I was not able to see for how long he was there. In 1881, he was living back in Illinois, where he committed a burglary. He was sentenced to 2 years for this crime. He was just 17 years old, and he was sent to the Joliet prison. His intake date was July 6th of 1881, and he was discharged on May 29th of 1883 at the age of 19. After his discharge from prison, he met a young lady by the name of Emma Stubbs. The two were married 5.5 months after he had gotten out of Joliet prison. Their wedding date is listed as November 19th, 1883. Now, from what I've read, they were only together for a few months. It says that he went back to prison, and that's why they broke up. But there's some confusion. So I have seen, that she left him after a few months, but the next time that we have a prison record for him isn't until about 2.5 years after the wedding. And the prison official at that time, has her listed as his wife on the official paperwork in 1885. So I think they just were mistaken about how long that marriage lasted.
Yeah, well, maybe she just left him after a few months, but they were still legally married?
That is certainly possible. Also, I saw that he was arrested and charged for a lot of different things. So maybe he had gone to jail on a charge and then wasn't convicted of it. And so they're just saying prison. I don't know. Well, a man named C.E. Mason contacted all of the prisons to get records for Alfred Knapp, and he found out that Alfred had been sentenced to the Indiana Reformatory in Jeffersonville, Indiana, from Vigo County, Indiana, on February 27th, 1885. At this time, he was 22 years old. He had a dark complexion, brown eyes, dark brown hair, 5 feet 9 inches tall, a scar on the right foot, and a mole on his back. And his wife, Emma Knapp, lived in Terre Haute, Indiana, which is in Vigo County, where he was prosecuted. Now, I don't have info for how long his sentence was for that one, but it certainly couldn't have been long because in the summer of 1886, he was in New Madrid Bend in Lake County, Missouri, and he assaulted a teenage girl. He had been living as a transient when he got out of prison, and he got incredibly thirsty one day in Missouri. He came upon a farmhouse, and he knocked on the door, and this young girl opened it and agreed to give him a cup of milk. He went inside, and he realized that she was home alone. So he pulled a gun on her, he assaulted her, which is the 1903 way of saying that he raped her. She cried and begged for him not to kill her, and he says that her desperation, how she was crying, that's what kept him from shooting her. On his way out the door, he grabbed a loaded Winchester rifle that was resting against the wall, and as soon as he got outside, he heard her scream for her brother, who it turns out had been working in the field. And then before he knew it, according to Alfred, he was being chased by a group of 10 to 15 men. And after a while, he realized he wasn't going to be able to get away by running, so he turned to face them and held them at bay with his gun. He backed away until he was out of sight, and then he turned and ran and escaped with his life. But he was sure he was going to be lynched if he had been caught. On October 11th of 1886, so just a few months after that, he got married to his second wife, Jenny Connor, in Dearborn County, Indiana. Not even 2 months later, Alfred was sentenced to prison again. He had stolen a pool table cover from a saloon keeper by the name of Michael Strauss, and he was given 1 year for larceny. He was sentenced December 16th, 1886, and was sent back to the Indiana Reformatory in Jeffersonville. His wife, Jenny, wrote him lots of letters, and she stayed faithful the whole time. I'm not sure exactly when he got out, but he wasn't out for too incredibly long. On Monday, May 5th, 1890, Alfred was working as a driver for the Witt Cornice Company in Cincinnati. It was about 7 o'clock in the morning when he saw a pretty young Cincinnati school teacher by the name of Miss Amanda Kiersteiner. And there she was just walking down the street. He leapt out of his seat, grabbed her from behind, and dragged her into the shrubs near the entrance to the Burnett Woods Park. She fought for her life, and he finally fled without successfully raping her. When he was arrested, he denied that he'd ever seen her, and obviously denied he had anything to do with her attack. But he did admit to having been arrested 3 times previously for rape. He was sentenced by Judge Schroeder on July 8th, 1890, to 4 years in prison. He was sent to the Ohio Penitentiary located in Columbus, Ohio, and his intake to that facility was July 22nd of 1890, and he was discharged on November 21st of 1893. So he served 3 years and 4 months for that one. I was thinking, that's the type of rape that we all fear, a stranger that you don't know jumping out and dragging you into the bushes. That's what we're all afraid of. That's why women don't go out, alone at night, stay with friends. But in reality, stranger rapes are far less common than being raped by someone you know.
When I go out at night, I'm more afraid I'm going to get murdered.
Well, kind of the same. Drag into a bush and murdered. Yep. So, yeah, now again, his wife, Jenny, stayed loyal and faithful and supportive, even though he's in prison for attempting to rape someone.
And she's just a fool. But I mean, you can't blame her, but she's still not smart.
Yeah, well, sometime in early 1894, so just within a few months, Alfred and Jenny both found employment with the Frank C. Bostock Street Fair Company. And one of his sisters also worked for them as a dancer. So Jenny was what they called an advance agent for them. I'm not sure what she did. And then Alfred was hired as a general utility man. And to hear him tell it, he was actually a trapeze artist.
Oh. Well, look at that. And there's one of his embellishments.
Yes. And so he told that to people. And the newspapers at first believed it. And they even printed that the reason his hands were so big and strong for strangling was because of his years on the trapeze. But in reality, he was just a maintenance man. However, after he got hired on, things started disappearing a lot. The performers said that trinkets and clothes were missing out of their dressing rooms. And I mean, nothing was off limits. Even really dumb little inexpensive things were taken. There were purses missing, plated chains, cheap finger rings, even whole trunks. And not only that, but the women who were in the beauty show for this street fair, they said that Alfred was giving them a lot of unwanted and persistent attention. He would show up at every performance, and when he would get to know one of them, like he knew what their name was or something, just superficial level, he began trying to take, quote, undue liberties with them. So the manager, J.A. Gorman, he heard these complaints, and he finally fired him at the very end of May 1894. And then Jenny left as well, and the two of them approached the Popcorn George Circus, where they were offered jobs as cooks.
So, Popcorn George was actually George Washington Hall, born in 1837. He was a prominent circus showman based in Evansville, Wisconsin. He's best known for his traveling circus that featured animal acts. This was the golden age of American circus, and Popcorn George is often mentioned in accounts of circus history alongside major showmen like the Ringling Brothers.
Yep. So they were going to be leaving town with the circus on June 21st of 1894. So in the meantime, they had a few weeks to kill.
They have weeks to kill. Well, I don't know if Jenny was doing much of the actual killing.
No, she wasn't. But someone we know committed his very first murder on that very same day, right before leaving with the circus. Alfred Knapp was 20 years old at this time. The circus had been set up with its exhibits on Jest Street in Cincinnati, Ohio. Alfred went alone to take his and Jenny's trunks to the baggage wagon. Now, it was a hot day, and on his way back to their apartment, he walked past the J.B. Dops & Sons lumberyard. The large stacks of lumber created pretty big shadows, and so he decided to go in and sit in the shade to cool down. While he was there, sometime after 3 o'clock p.m., a girl by the name of Emma Littleman came in carrying a basket. He described her as
a good chunk of a girl, 12 or 14 years, I should say, and well-developed.
Sicko.
Ugh, gross.
She was, in fact, 12. He talked to her, and she responded. She said that she was gathering kindling wood, and then he said that he broke up some wood pieces for her, helping her out, and then she wound up sitting in the shade beside him. This is when he took liberties with her. He says she was quiet at first, but then she screamed. In fact, he said that she didn't protest and was letting him do it at first, but I find that hard to believe. So she was just not making a lot of noise. I'm going to say that he just misunderstood. But then she screamed. So there had been a man working on a lumber pile about 20 feet away, and he was really worried that that man would hear her scream and, come to see what was happening. So he grabbed her by the throat to hush her. He said that after a little while, he realized he'd gone too far. And so now he was worried if she were to recover, then she'd probably get him in big trouble. So he found himself a triangular piece of lumber that had been laying nearby, and he hit her on the head to kill her. He then stuffed her body under the lumber pile in a gap that was there in the wood, and then he went home. And I actually do have drawn illustrations showing how she was found in the lumber pile, and also there was a triangular wound on her forehead. Like, it was like he stamped her with it.
Oof.
Yeah. And then that night, he and his wife left with the circus. And the next day, he read in the Cincinnati Enquirer, while he was over in the city of Aurora, of the finding of young Emma's body. So the newspapers reported that her dress was ripped and that her skull was crushed on both the front and the back, and then again had that triangle-shaped wound on the forehead because he had apparently just pounded straight down with the end of that wood. The murder of Emma Littleman took place 7 months to the day of his release from the Ohio penitentiary for the assault and attempted rape of the schoolteacher. So there were no clues as to who had perpetrated this horrific crime, and it remained unsolved until February 26, 1903, when Alfred confessed. But the confessions did not end there. It turns out that Jenny and Alfred hated being cooks for the traveling circus, so they wound up leaving and heading back home to Cincinnati after just a few weeks. Well, another murder took place on July 26th of 1894 on Walnut Street in Cincinnati, Ohio. For some reason, Alfred insists that this murder took place on August 1st, but it's actually in the newspapers on July 26th that her body was found, so he is mistaken. Now, Mary Eckhart was from Dayton, Ohio. She was either 18 or 19 in the summer of 1894, and she was married to a man named Jacob Eckhart. She and her husband were not getting along at the time. He had apparently lost his job as a broom sewer, and so she went to Cincinnati to see if she could find work in a cigar factory. They would reconsider their relationship when the finances were all figured out. Well, Mary had made the acquaintance of Alfred Knapp sometime earlier. There was an ad for a correspondent in Dayton, Ohio, which Alfred answered, and then he got a letter back from Mary in reply.
When Alfred said he answered an advertisement for a correspondent, he basically meant a pen pal. Newspapers back then often had personal ads where lonely people could look for friendship, romance, or somebody to write letters to. So this was kind of the 1884 version of meeting someone online. Alfred answered the ad, Mary Eckhart wrote back, and the two started corresponding through the mail before eventually meeting in person.
And he was still married to Jenny, mind you, this whole time.
Skunk.
Yep. So according to Alfred, he had sent Mary Eckhart a letter asking her to meet him in Cincinnati, and so she did. He took her to a cheap hotel and they registered as husband and wife. Well, he couldn't stay with her the entire night because, according to Alfred, he and Jenny were temporarily living with his sister, Mary Knapp King, on 12th and Elm Street. And Mary Eckhart knew that he was married. Well, when he went back to see her again, she was gone, and he had no clue where she had gone. But one morning, several weeks later, he was walking down Walnut Street and he saw her standing at the window of a boarding house, which was located right across the street from the YMCA. He went up to chat with her and he found out that when she disappeared, she had actually gone back to Dayton to see her husband. Well, now that he knew she was back in Cincinnati, he went to see her every day. And she actually asked if she could meet his wife. So, according to Alfred, he took Jenny over there and introduced her to Mary. He also says that he took Hannah Goddard over to Mary's house.
Hannah, his wife, his later wife, the one that he dumped in the river.
Yes, so he claims that he had been messing around with both Hannah and Mary Eckhart behind Jenny's back. And he says that Hannah knew Mary as, her competition because Hannah wanted to be with him, and so did Mary. Well, he says that on the morning of Mary Eckhart's murder, he had first gone over to his sister's house to get Hannah Goddard. Because remember, Hannah and his sister Mary King were best friends, and Hannah lived with Mary and her husband. So he went to the King residence to get Hannah, who at the time was employed as a waitress at the Rockwell's restaurant on Walnut Street down by the Columbia Theater. He says that he picked up a newspaper for Mary Eckhart on the way because she was looking for a job. And then he and Hannah continued on to Mary's rooming house. He told Hannah to go inside with him, he said. It was about 6 o'clock in the morning. He said Mary was up and dressed, and a bit later, Mary left to go get some meat for breakfast. And at that time, while she was gone, Hannah and Alfred started messing around on Mary's bed. So when Mary came back and she saw what they were doing, she was very angry. And Mary said she was going to tell Jenny, his wife. Alfred said that he knew that if Mary told Jenny, there would be a murder one way or another because Jenny had a very violent temper, and they had fought a lot in the past about Alfred's attentions to other women.
Well, I mean, I feel like she should have been mad before. Maybe she should have murdered him before.
That would have been handy in the long run. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me they'd fight. I mean, every time he's not in prison, he's committing a crime against a woman. So, I mean, I can see.
Yeah.
After they had that confrontation where Mary was like, "What are you doing? I'm going to tell your wife." Then Mary had to go out one more time to the bakery to get some rolls to go with breakfast. And so she left Hannah and Alfred alone in her room one more time. And keep in mind, this is all according to Alfred. So here's how Alfred explained what happened next.
Hannah knew as well as I did that if Mary told Jenny, she would kill one or both of us unless we killed her. So Hannah suggested that we kill Mary to keep her from telling. I consented, and when Mary returned from the baker's, I grabbed her by the throat and choked her while Hannah held her hands. When she stopped struggling, I let her down on the floor and tied the towel around her neck. Then Hannah and I went out separately.
It was later discovered that Mary Eckhart was pregnant at the time of her murder.
No.
Yep. I personally think there's a very good chance that it was Alfred's baby because he was going to see her every day after he found out she was back in Cincinnati.
So, Hannah helped him murder Mary Eckhart?
Well, that is what he insisted until the day he died. But Alfred's sister, Mary King, went on the record to say that he didn't even meet Hannah Goddard until a full 2 weeks after the murder of Mary Eckhart. So according to her, it was impossible. But Alfred also said that he and his wife Jenny had been staying temporarily with his sister Mary King when they got back from the circus, like a month or so earlier. And Hannah Goddard had been living with Mary, her BFF, at that time. So I'm not sure if he did know Hannah at the time or not. I don't know.
And his sister Mary is the one he was closest to, so it would make more sense that he already knew Hannah.
That's what I think too.
Maybe Mary's just protecting Hannah.
That's kind of what I was thinking too. To be like, she would never, don't speak ill of the dead. I don't know though. Because, I mean, for being so forthcoming about all of these things, and he still insisted, no, she was there. She helped me. So the murder of Mary Eckhart was his second murder. And the following day, Jenny was accusing him of having some part in it.
She read it in the Enquirer the next morning, and as soon as she read it, she accused me of doing it and then threatened to tell the police. I denied it, but she seemed to know that I did it, and she said she would never have anything more to do with me. Then you decided to kill her. Not right away. She wanted to die and agreed to let me choke her, and I did so.
What? What? Wait. So you decided to kill her? No, but I mean, she wanted to die. So,
I gave in.
That's a lot to unpack.
Well, so this whole thing was a big mess. Jenny Connor Knapp, his second wife, she was apparently very lively, and she was a very jealous woman. And according to Alfred, when Jenny met Mary Eckhart, she started accusing him of sleeping with her, which, I mean, he was.
He was.
Yeah. And then when she was found dead, Jenny accused Alfred of the murder, despite having no reason to think that he did it. Well, he'd been to prison like twice since they were married, so I can see why she would think that. But then Jenny also didn't like Hannah, he said. So Alfred claims that Jenny was so excitable and over the top that he was actually afraid for his life. He had to get knives and revolvers away from her on multiple occasions. And on the night before he killed Jenny, she had even bitten him on the shoulder. And she very, very often threatened suicide. And that part, the suicide part, was verified by a ton of people. Now, everyone who knew her said that she had talked about killing herself like all the time. Well, it turns out that Jenny had gotten pregnant, and she did not want children.
Or did she? I think Alfred doesn't want children.
Perhaps. Now, finding out that she was pregnant made everything even more depressing for her, according to Alfred. And she asked him to kill her and put her out of her misery, so he claims that he killed Jenny upon her own request. Well, there they were on August 8th of 1894, just 13 days after the murder of Mary Eckhart, and they were walking together in Cincinnati. He had some business downtown, and as they walked, they were arguing incessantly. According to him, Jenny wanted Alfred to commit suicide with her. So when they reached the 12th Street Canal Bridge, she said,
"Well, here's as good a place as any."
Alfred says he would have jumped and killed himself. He had nothing against the idea, but he knew there wasn't enough water to drown either of them, and so he declined. He says they then walked along the canal bank until they reached Liberty Street. He says when they were there, they, quote, wrangled and wrangled. So I think that means they just kept arguing. He said that she was stuck on committing suicide, and Alfred was afraid of her because he thought that she knew that he'd killed Mary Eckhart. And also, he did think that Jenny was going to kill him, he said.
Well, she kept on talking suicide until I just thought I'd help her. So I got her by the throat and choked her pretty hard. Then I let go to see if she'd changed her mind. But as she didn't even whimper, I again choked her until I thought she was dead and tossed her into the canal. I knew she wasn't dead when she hit the water, for she sort of struggled for a minute, but she soon went down and the water did what I overlooked.
After this, he just headed back to his home located at Bower and Central Avenues, and the next morning he read in the paper of a suicide of a woman in the canal. Now, I personally could not find any news coverage about her death in August of 1894 or even in September. Like, I tried to figure that out. But apparently he, when he had to identify her body, he had tears and just, oh no, yes, that's my wife.
So now we've got 3 murders, and they were all very close together.
Yeah, so June 21st, and then July 26th, and then August 8th of 1894.
He was a very busy boy that summer.
Yeah, and he wasn't done. Not yet. So 19 days after he murdered his second wife, Jenny Connor Knapp, he wound up getting married to wife number 3. So 19 days. It was August 27th, 1894, when he and none other than Hannah Goddard made their union official. If you ask Alfred, he had been sleeping with her for some time. But again, if you ask his sister Mary, Alfred met Hannah for the first time around August 10th. So 2 days after he murdered Jenny. And then they were married 2.5 weeks later. Now, at the time of this marriage, Alfred was 31 and Hannah was 21. Alfred and Hannah moved to Muncie, Indiana shortly after getting married. Muncie is roughly 105 miles away from Cincinnati. He got a job as a day laborer for James Boyce and Wallace Sessline. According to them, he was a pretty quiet guy. And then they moved to West Indianapolis, where things soon went awry again.
Back in the year 1882, West Indianapolis was incorporated as its own city, separate from Indianapolis. Historically, it was a blue-collar industrial neighborhood featuring a mix of residential housing and industrial firms like Rolls-Royce. In 1897, it was annexed by Indianapolis and is no longer a separate city.
Yeah, so this next murder is probably the very worst of the bunch.
Even if you had a neck as long as a giraffe and had sore throat all the way down, tonsilline would quickly cure it. Tonsilline is the greatest throat remedy on earth. Tonsilline cures sore throats of all kinds very quickly and is a positive, never-failing, and speedy cure for sore mouth, hoarseness, and quinsy. A small bottle of tonsilline lasts longer than most any case of sore throat. 25 and 50 cents at all druggists. The Tonsilline Co., Kenton, Ohio.
It was July 19th, 1895, in the city of West Indianapolis, Indiana. At about 7 o'clock a.m., Alfred came upon a 3-year-old girl crying on the sidewalk of River Avenue. At the time, he thought she seemed lost, but he found out later that she was standing just a few feet from the gate of her own home. He asked her what was wrong, and she said that her mother had whipped her, so she wanted to hide. Alfred claims he had no intention to hurt her and did not ask her to go with him, but she followed him and asked him for candy. He told her he didn't have any candy. He had been on his way to mow a lawn for someone, he said, and he says that when he got to a stable, little Ida followed him inside. In another version of the story, he tells a reporter that it had started to rain, and that's why they both stepped into the stable at the rear of 137 River Avenue. He swears that he did not rape her, but he had a strong temptation to choke her. He says he just couldn't resist, and he choked her from behind. Once she was dead, he put her body inside of a toolbox nearby. There was another box and a piece of oilcloth that he put on top of this toolbox. He said that every time he thinks back to what the body looked like, he feels sick. He said,
I am telling the truth when I tell you I did not assault the child and did not mean to kill her. I don't know why I did it, but I did.
And again, when he says assault, he is alluding to sexual assault. Now, this happened in 1895, but he confessed to it in 1903, so about 8 years later. When the news came out in 1903, and the papers revived the story of little Ida's murder, they had a vastly different tale to tell. According to 1903 reporting, there was a bloody hatchet nearby with long golden strands of hair still stuck to the blade. Her skull was split open, they said. There were chops to her face with the blows going through her cheek and her jaw. The skull had a deep indentation where the pole of the weapon had hit. Also, according to 1903, her mother then died of a broken heart, and her father returned to Germany a broken man. But, looking at Find a Grave, I see that her parents had 2 children after she died. One was born 4 years after Ida's murder, and the other was born 6 years after the murder. Both of these little sisters were born in Michigan, so we know that the couple moved, along with Ida's baby sister Elizabeth, who had been just tiny when her big sister was murdered. And furthermore, Ida's mother lived for 61 more years after Ida's murder. And when I went back to the actual coverage of Ida's murder, back when it happened in 1895, it says nothing about a hatchet or a crushed skull or anything of the sort. It simply says that she was assaulted and smothered before being put into the box.
They really love just running with it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is why it's important to only trust the coverage in the newspapers from the actual time the crime was committed. We have found over and over that reports written many years after the fact tend to be embellished and fabricated.
Yes, and it's very frustrating, especially when you find that the official account today is based on those later fabrications. That makes me a very angry person. Now, to make this even more sinister, Alfred Knapp was among the crowd standing near the stable when the body was found. Someone had, smelled that smell of death and had alerted people to the location before anyone poked around inside to actually figure out where it was coming from. And so he was standing there and he expressed outrage alongside everyone else when the body was found. And he was actually part of the lynch mob who gathered together and vowed to get revenge on whomever had murdered this 3-year-old girl.
I mean, hiding in plain sight.
Yeah, I know. And they do say that, killers sometimes will go back to the scene to watch it unfold and everything. And that was true here in 1895. Shortly after murdering Ida, he attempted to assault 2 other little girls. The parents knew exactly who had done it. The girls were able to say that it was him. And they openly accused Alfred Knapp. Well, at the time, Alfred and his wife Hannah were living with his parents in West Indianapolis. So his mom actually took him with her to go to the home of, one of these little girls. And she struck a deal with the parents and said, in exchange for not pressing charges against Alfred, we're just going to move. We will move out of West Indianapolis. We'll go to regular Indianapolis. And they were like, okay, deal. Well, then later, on August 29th in 1895, just a month and 10 days after murdering Ida, he struck again. Young Bessie Draper was just 13 years old and had recently come to Indianapolis from Terre Haute. She was living with her aunt because her mother, back in Terre Haute, was very poor and she wanted better for Bessie. On the morning of August 29th, 1895, Bessie had gone to pick up some clothes for her aunt from a neighborhood washerwoman. On the street, she met Alfred Knapp. He told her that he was looking for a nanny for his sister's children, and she said that she thought that would be a great job for her. He told her to come back and meet him after she had dropped her aunt's washing back at home. And when she got home, she told her aunt about this potential job, this guy she'd run into. And her aunt told her, well, go ahead, go and meet the family, meet the kids, and then use your own judgment. I trust you. If you want to take the job, take it. So Bessie went back and she found Alfred, who was moving a chest of drawers with a wheelbarrow from one house to another. He wanted her to go into the house where he had taken the dresser, but she refused. And after he finished moving the furniture, he took her on a walk to get her to his sister's house.
Interesting. And he did not have a sister in Indianapolis, by the way.
So this was just a ruse. So he takes her on this long, winding walk through streets and alleys, and soon Bessie starts to feel a little scared. Her uncle had been talking just the night before about the unsolved murder of little Ida. But Alfred looked like an honest man, so she just kept on going. Well, he soon turned down an alley near Wisconsin Street, and she could see a cross alley up ahead. And I'm assuming that means like you would get to a point where there's just a brick wall or something in front of you, and you could either turn left or right. Like that's what I'm assuming. And so she was worried, and she walked very briskly ahead of him so she could get up there and look both ways to make sure there were exits, like ways out of the alleys. And she saw that one of them was closed at the end, and she really was worried, didn't want to go down that one with him. And so she went and ran the other way so she could get out. Well, he started chasing her. And when he caught up to her, he caught her by the throat and he threw her to the ground. She had managed to get a scream out before she hit the ground. And at that moment, he saw a German man who was approaching. And so Alfred let her go immediately. So Bessie got to her feet, and then Alfred picked up some rocks and started throwing them at Bessie. And then he disappeared. And Bessie did not see him again until after he was arrested. Yeah. So interestingly, when they got him on the stand on October 1st of 1895, because he went to trial for this attack on Bessie, they asked him for his whereabouts during the Ida Gebhard murder, which happened, again, over in West Indianapolis. He said that he had left town shortly after she was murdered to avoid being arrested for public indecency. So, I mean, this guy had a lot of very odd, hobbies. Oh, my goodness. So the state called a number of witnesses that proved Alfred had committed quite a few offenses similar to the Bessie Draper assault over in West Indianapolis when he lived there, and that resulted in the community demanding that he be removed. And so, again, his mother agreed, we'll all just move if you don't press charges and all of that. So they were able to prove that. And then they showed that shortly after moving to regular Indianapolis, that's when the assault on Bessie Draper happened. So, pretty interesting. On October 3rd of 1895, Alfred was sentenced to 10 years in prison. And the maximum was 14 years. That's what they were hoping for, but he got 10. As he was led out of the courtroom, he turned and kissed both his mother and his wife, Hannah, who had sat beside him through the whole thing. Alfred was processed into the Indiana State Prison in Michigan City, Indiana, on October 11th of 1895. He was released after serving 6 years and 8 months on June 7th of 1902.
Okay, so if I'm counting correctly, he went to prison 5 times already. Once for larceny, twice for burglary, and twice for violent attempted rape, one of which was a 13-year-old.
You got it. And for those 6 years and 8 months, his wife, Hannah Goddard Knapp, was devoted to her man. She lived with her best friend, Mary King, which was Alfred's sister, and then also Mary's husband, Edward King, in the Cummingsville neighborhood of Cincinnati, Ohio. So she lived with them the whole time that Alfred was in prison. Hannah and Alfred sent long, loving letters to each other, and she just could not wait for him to come back home. He got out in June of 1902, and they moved over to Hamilton, Ohio to live temporarily with her uncle, Charles Goddard. Alfred found a job there at the Carr Milling Company, and he was up on roofs doing things, work with hammers and chisels. And on 2 different occasions, he was seen by coworkers purposely dropping heavy metal tools off of the roofs, seemingly like aiming at people who were walking on the street below. He was literally trying to kill them by, quote, accidentally dropping a tool. Isn't that crazy?
I thought you were going to say he was hitting himself in the head.
Oh.
I was going to be like,
no. No, he was trying to kill people. So for this, he wound up fired in the early fall of 1902. And now there was no money to pay the rent for the room that they now occupied on 4th Street with Charles Dattilow and his wife. On September 16th of 1902, that is when little Stella and Hattie Motzer were attacked in an alley. So little Stella, you remember, she was 6. Her head and her face were cut with a knife. And then little 5-year-old Hattie had been beaten. So the police, they had Joe Roth facing the charges for that. So that's where that fits into the timeline. On December 20th of 1902, Alfred committed a robbery, stealing the purse of an elderly woman named Mrs. Feldman. He got $16.75. Though he later said that he actually dropped some of the silver coins on the street, so he didn't quite get the whole amount. And 2 days later, very early in the morning of December 22nd, 1902, he woke up to the realization that his hands were wrapped quite tightly around Hannah's neck. He'd been out of prison for just 6.5 months.
He's kind of dumb. Okay, so he was arrested for Hannah's murder on February 25th of 1903, and now he's confessing to all of this on February 26th.
Yes, and this murder was in Hamilton, Ohio, but there were also 3 murders in Cincinnati, and then the one in Indiana. Well, Hamilton wanted to take their crack at him first, and the way that it went in Ohio back in 1903, they had to locate Hannah's body, or they wouldn't have a case. And so they searched and searched and searched the river. On February 27th, the day after this massive confession, a farmer by the name of Frank Buckner found an empty wooden box washed ashore on the Herman Greiser farm. It looked just like the box described by Alfred Knapp as the one in which he had entombed Hannah, but this one was empty. On February 28th, they decided that the search was completely fruitless. There was no hope. They would never find her. So the police called off the search completely, but that didn't sit well with the Cincinnati Post newspaper. They went ahead and hired a professional diver by the name of J. Victor Earhart, and they had him simply go to the place where the body was dumped and take a look at things, conditions of the river and all of that, so that he could give them an idea of where the body may have ended up. He said that he figured the box was probably broken by bowling along the bottom of the river, and he thinks that the broken empty box that had been found on the Herman Greiser farm was probably the box that she had been in. So he said that her body was probably not in the box, and it was most likely in the Ohio River by this point. He said that the body would be pretty decomposed and in bad shape, considering she had been in the water for over 2 months. And he said that they'd probably only be able to recognize her by the black stockings that she was wearing when he put her in the box.
Well, they weren't wrong.
It's true. And then just 2 days after the diver gave his expert opinion, the body was located in the Ohio River, looking just the way he said it might. The first person to identify the body was Edward King, so the husband of her best friend and a person she had lived with for years and years. Her face was not recognizable, and her waist-length hair was completely missing. But Edward recalled the scar that was visible on her forehead, as well as the rings that she wore on her hand. Her uncle Charles went later that day and also positively identified her body. She had a bandage around her ankle covering a wound that she'd recently sustained with a nail. And one of the rings that she wore is one that her Uncle Charles had given her for her 28th birthday, which was the last birthday that she would ever have. The body still wore the 2 layers of stockings that Alfred said she'd had on when he put her in the box, and there was simply no doubt that this was indeed the body of Hannah Knapp. After a thorough examination, it was found that she had also been pregnant.
I'm telling you, He didn't want kids. So Mary and Jenny were also pregnant.
Yeah. So all 3 of the adults that he murdered were pregnant women. And then the other 2 were children.
So if you count the unborn babies, that's 8 victims in total.
Yes. And if Mary Eckhart's baby was his, then that means he murdered all 3 of his own children.
I'm telling you, he didn't want kids.
I don't know if he knew. I mean, I have a feeling that he probably knew that Hannah was pregnant because they said she was probably like 5 or 6 months along. Now that they've got the body of his victim located, the officials in Hamilton were ready to move forward with a prosecution. The prosecutor was Warren Guard, and he was very confident that he would be able to convict. As for the defense, Alfred's family was scrambling to get that part figured out. Now, right after this news broke, a reporter visited Alfred's parents over in Cincinnati, where they were staying with, the family of their youngest son, Cyrus Knapp Jr., as well as their daughter, Sarah Knapp Wenzel, known as Sadie. When the reporter arrived, the father, 64-year-old Cyrus Knapp, was sitting in a chair while 63-year-old Susanna Knapp was on her knees surrounded by suds, because she was scrubbing the floor. So the reporter breaks the news to them. They didn't know that Alfred had confessed to killing 5 people. He breaks the news to the parents, and Susanna at first remained composed until she thought about her youngest son, Cyrus Jr., who, lived in that home with his wife and 2 children. Susanna covered her face with her hands and wailed,
"My God, this will disgrace my baby boy and his little children. Would to God Alfred had died in his cradle. He is not sane. No one will believe his confession. He is crazy."
Thank you. Her husband murmured, "Poor Cyrus," and covered his eyes with his trembling hands.
That is not the reaction you would want. Like, as someone who confessed to murder, you would want them to care about you, I feel like, and not like, oh, the baby.
I know. I found that to be very odd. I mean, you'd think they'd be like, oh my gosh, he's terrible. I feel so bad that he murdered people. But no, they're just like, oh, our other son's reputation. It's like, that's so bizarre. But yeah, anyway, so according to later reports, I mean, as strange as that was, Cyrus actually moved his family to Kentucky and changed his name legally so that he would have no obvious connection to his brother. So I don't know what Cyrus did for a living. Like, why would that have been so, massively horrific, for him to be related? They didn't care about the sisters, but I guess they were married and had different last names. I don't know. It's so weird.
He was an electrician.
So Alfred's dad then told the reporter that Alfred had been a trial to them all their lives, and Susanna said that he could not be responsible for the things he did because his brain had been injured from the time he was 6. Well, Sadie, Sister Sadie, was married to a man that they called Charles. Like, he went by Charles. He's called Charles in the papers, but his real name was George Wenzel. Anyway, so Sadie and Charles were separated at the time. These 2 seemed to have a very volatile on-again, off-again marriage. And at this time, Charles was staying with his brother in Chicago because they were broken up. And the reason that they were broken up this time, according to Sadie, is that none other than Hannah Goddard Knapp had taken liberties with her husband and split them up.
I wonder how Sadie and Mary got along.
We'll get there. You just wait. So much drama started very publicly with this family. So Mary Knapp King was furious that Sadie was blaming her BFF, Hannah Goddard, for the breakup of Sadie's marriage. Mary told the papers that what had happened was that Mary and Hannah had gone shopping somewhere one day. And when they came back to Cincinnati, they ran into Mary's husband, Edward, who happened to be hanging out with Sadie's husband, Charles. And so here's the 4 of them. Oh, hey, didn't imagine running into you guys. Is anyone hungry? They went and ate food together. And so later when Sadie found out about it, she decided that the only reason that Hannah and Charles would have been there, along with a married couple, was if something sinister was going on between the 2 of them. So I feel like Sadie was a little bit off her rocker. Now, Sadie, meanwhile, hated her sister Mary with an absolute passion because she was sure that Mary is the one who convinced Edward to go to the police, and therefore it was their fault that their very mentally ill and clearly not responsible brother was now sitting in jail facing the death penalty for, doing things that he simply could not help because of his damaged brain. Sadie said that she had had to move at one point due to all of this unwelcome notoriety from the case, and then her sister Mary showed up and stood in front of Sadie's new home to tell everyone who passed by, this is where she lives, and she's the sister of Alfred Knapp. So Sadie wound up taking her elderly and quite sickly father with her to the police to ask for protection, a protection order against her sister Mary.
Wait, so she took Cyrus?
Yeah. Because they were living with Sadie.
Drama.
Oh, I know. It was wild.
Tea.
Sadie, who was living with her parents, then cut Mary off from any contact. Edward King made a statement saying he thought it was so bizarre that the family was so angry with him for trying to bring Alfred to account for these really, truly terrible things. Well, Sadie told the papers that she'd tried to have Alfred committed to an asylum several times in the past, but her parents wouldn't hear of it. So let's talk about his fourth wife, 19-year-old Annie Gamble Knapp. She was a spitfire. She was very supportive of her man, and she didn't care whatsoever that he had murdered anyone. She told the newsmen in Indianapolis that she had had no clue he had a wife named Hannah. She just knew he'd been married at some point. And she said that even if Alfred swore on a pack of Bibles that he had murdered 5 people, she still wouldn't believe it because his mother had told her once that he wasn't right in the head. Annie was very angry that Alfred had been taken away from her. She wanted to be with him 100% of the time, and in fact, hadn't allowed him to seek employment because it would have taken him away from her. She told the news reporters that she wanted to kill the policeman who had made a charge against Alfred, and she also really hated Alfred's sister.
She don't like me, and she said mean things about me. I'd go right to Hamilton if they wouldn't lock me up. They would lock me up on a charge of murder because I'd stick a knife in that sister the first thing I did.
So Annie brought out several letters that had been sent to Alfred after his family found out that the two were married. And she thinks every one of them were probably written by his sister Sadie. Annie said that she wanted to whip her to death.
You bet I could do it too. She's the cause of all my trouble. I'm going to stand by my husband if they do send him to the penitentiary for murder. I'll just go with him.
Another time, Annie told reporters that she wishes Alfred had choked her to death.
I don't care how many people he murdered. He didn't murder me, did he? And if he had, it wouldn't be any of your business. I'm going to Hamilton if I have to walk, and I'll go on to Cincinnati and see my husband's sister Sadie, and I'll murder her. She's the cause of all this trouble.
Well, Annie had things a little backwards because Sadie was Alfred's biggest supporter, along with their parents. Sadie and her parents were determined to prove that Alfred was insane and therefore not criminally responsible for what he had done. Sadie was able to hire 2 Cincinnati attorneys, Thomas Darby and John Thomas, and then eventually another one from Hamilton named Attorney Haynes. The trial began on June 22nd of 1903, and as a reminder, Alfred was 40 years old. Thomas Darby was the lead attorney, and he was absolutely convinced that Alfred was insane due to the multiple traumatic brain injuries that he had endured. I mean, you could still see where the horse kicked him more than 30 years later. Darby had Alfred's family members and coworkers testify to the odd things that he did. For example, even when he was in his 20s, he preferred to play in the streets with young boys than to be around adults. And he was so bizarre, like he was throwing rocks at women when they were passengers in cars that passed or wagons. But anyway, he was so bizarre that everyone referred to him as Looney Knapp. That was his nickname in town. One of his old teachers, Miss Mott S. Marshall, gave a deposition from Indiana, and it was read into the court transcript in Ohio. And in it, she said that
he was a dull, stupid, and disobedient boy and had no conception of morality.
Good Lord.
He was a bad boy, she said, and he had fainting spells, and he couldn't understand the difference between right and wrong. People testified to the fact that he often fell prey to religious mania. Like anytime a new church, he came upon a new church or met someone from a different church, he'd be like, oh, heck yeah, I'm joining that one. And at one point, he wrote a play called An Angel in a Bar Room, and he made angel wings for his sister to wear in this play, and he was furious when she wouldn't try to actually fly. Now, Sadie's husband, Charles, took the stand. He said that he had actually seen Alfred in Hamilton, Ohio on December 21st, 1902, the day before he murdered Hannah. At that time, Alfred told Charles that he had a dog that was worth $100 to $200, and he also had a 25-cent piece of jewelry, which he told Charles was worth $50.
And back in 1902, $50 was equal to about $1,800 today.
Alfred had also told Charles that he was going to be the next mayor of Hamilton and that everything had already been arranged. And he told him that he was a detective, he had a badge, and he could arrest anyone he wanted. So that was the day before he killed Hannah. There was a lot more, so much more, but this episode is very, very long already, so I have condensed things and we're moving forward. A brain expert named Dr. John Sanderson Christison was following the case, but he was not involved in the trial. Dr. Christison was a criminologist. He was recognized in both the U.S. and England, and he gave his opinion to the newspapers and said that Alfred was undeniably insane. He also very correctly pointed out that
in this country, the state's officers seem to delight more in obtaining executions than in obtaining justice, and thus comparatively few offenders are declared insane.
And I mean, he makes a good point. Dr. Christison said that Alfred had a long history of spells when he would have, horrific pain in his head and he would grit his teeth and ball his fists and sometimes even fly into a rage.
The conclusion is that he had not met with injury to the brain in childhood. He would in all probability have grown up to be as useful and successful as his 2 brothers and 4 sisters, and would not be where he now is. He cannot be considered a responsible individual.
Dr. Christison was from the school of thought that said physical traits would indicate criminal tendencies. He said that he was mostly from good stock, but his mother showed signs of neuroticism and black hair. Back in the 1800s and early 1900s, black hair was seen as less desirable and more common among criminals and upstanding citizens. This is the type of thinking that helped fuel the eugenics movement in the United States in the early 1900s. While Dr. Christison did not testify in the trial, there was one expert that was put on the stand, and that was Dr. Brooke T. Beebe, who also said that Alfred was certainly insane.
He is a victim of epileptic insanity, probably resulting from degeneration of the brain cells as a result of early injuries. His emotional and intellectual nature are both defective, and his disease involves loss of moral character.
Then, Prosecutor Guard brought up several doctors who had seen Alfred after his arrest, and they all said that he was perfectly sane and he certainly knew right from wrong. The case was given over to the jury, and the verdict came in on July 16, 1903, at 7:35 in the morning. Alfred Andrew Knapp was guilty of murder in the first degree for the murder of Hannah Goddard Knapp, and the jury was not recommending mercy. So this meant the electric chair. Alfred was shocked, but he was convinced that he would never make it to the chair. He knew something would come up to save him in the end. His sister Sadie and his parents, and even his sister Mary, were heartbroken. They all knew that he was insane. Alfred's attorneys filed an appeal and pointed out that when the judge had allowed Alfred's entire confession to be brought in, that prejudiced the jury against him. He was only on trial for Hannah's murder, after all, and so the other murders that he hadn't even been convicted of, they shouldn't have even been brought in at all. Because aside from his word just saying, I killed these people, there was literally no legal proof that he did, The circuit court agreed and he was granted a new trial, but then the state's prosecutor appealed that decision with the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court reversed the circuit court's decision, and therefore the death penalty would stand. And he was scheduled to sit in the electric chair on August 19th of 1904. In one last-ditch effort, Sadie went around to all the jurors and even family members of the victims to see if they would sign a petition to have Alfred's death sentence commuted to life in prison. But none of them would sign.
As is rightfully so.
Alfred Knapp, being the odd duck that he was sitting in prison trying to sell his body for $50 to medical students.
I just want to know what he was going to do with the money.
I don't know.
Give it to Annie.
Yeah, he could have given it to Annie. Or maybe just put it on his books to buy cigars and stuff. I don't know.
True.
Yeah, but $50 is a lot, though. It's like, like you said, $1,800.
$1,800.
That's crazy. But yeah, apparently the medical students had come to see him. I think it was their idea. And then he was like, oh, heck yeah. And he wanted to do a whole contract and everything so that they would get possession of the body after he was dead. And yeah, and no one could interfere, but it didn't work out. Now, on Wednesday, August 17th, he had his final visit with his mother and sister Sadie. His father had actually passed away during all of this from just the immense stress. During this last visit, his sister asked him to please make a confession of everything. Like if there was anything else, she wanted him to come clean, especially if someone else had been implicated in the crime. Thursday, August 18th was Alfred's last day alive. He was in good spirits, he played cards with fellow inmates, and he played his accordion. Only one song that he played was specifically named in the paper, and it was, "There'll Be a Hot Time Tonight."
You want to shout and sing, there'll be a hot time in the old town tonight.
The paper said that he played other popular tunes as well, and he wrote letters all day, and he even wrote out one last confession, and it reads,
Ohio Penitentiary Annex, August 18, 1904. To whom it may concern, Joe Roth is innocent of the attack on the two monster children on September 16, 1902. As I done that myself, but there was no intention of committing assault on them. Now I am doing this to clear Joe Roth's name, as I attacked the children myself. Alfred Knapp.
For his last meal, he ate spring chicken, salad, watermelon, tomatoes, milk, and bread. Now, he had recently converted to Catholicism while in prison, and he had Father Clark and another priest sitting with him from 9:45 p.m. until the execution, which would take place at midnight. Shortly before midnight, Warden Hershey sent a pint of whiskey to Father Clark with instructions to let Knapp have as much as he wanted. And then there's no word on if or how much he had. I don't know.
Is this supposed to help with the electrocution?
With the nerves, I guess. He's a dying man. Go ahead and give him a drink. I don't know. Yeah. Now, when the time came, Alfred walked alone. The newspapers had been saying, he's so nervous he's probably going to have to be carried to the chair, which it was actually he's fine, but okay. But yeah, so they reported that he walked alone, unassisted to the electric chair, and there were guards walking in front of him as well as behind, and he walked into the death chamber at 12:01 a.m. on Friday, August 19th of 1904. After he sat down, the prison staff began adjusting clamps and electrodes while he was just gazing at the spectators. None of his family members were there, and in fact, the warden told Sadie that he would have her arrested if she tried to get into the prison. He did see Mayor Bosch from the county jail as well as Sheriff Brannon there, and he nodded in a hello. Now, after the head electrode was fastened, Warden Hershey asked,
Alfred, have you anything to say before the sentence of the law shall have been executed? Nothing. Goodbye? Goodbye.
They adjusted the death mask, and then a signal was given to the warden to let him know that they were ready. A writer for the Dayton Daily News printed what happened next, and I'm just going to read it to you.
The switch was thrown at 12:03 a.m. There was a hissing, buzzing sound accompanied by a snort like a wounded hog as the muscles of the strangler became taut when the deadly current coursed through his body. The powerful current raised him from the chair for the 7 seconds that the full tension was maintained. A tiny wreath of smoke curled up from his head. Then, as the warden reduced the pressure, the body slowly settled. For a full minute, the reduced current was sent through his throbbing frame, and then suddenly the extreme pressure was thrown on again. Once more there was the terrible convulsion and awful tension. Once more the terrible snort was heard, and another tiny wreath of smoke went up. The current was turned off, and Dr. Thomas, the prison physician, opened the clothing and listened for signs of heart action. Other doctors in turn, including Dr. Grant Goodwin of Indianapolis, who had been invited to the execution by the strangler, examined the body with a stethoscope. All agreed on their finding. Dr. Thomas made another examination, and at 12:09 a.m. pronounced Knapp dead.
The body was taken in charge by Hart and O'Shaughnessy, Columbus undertakers, and he was buried in a Columbus Catholic cemetery. There were actually no marks on the body, and the smoke was caused by the consumption of the sal ammoniac solution that was used on the head electrode.
Well, that's the story of Alfred Andrew Knapp. Jesse McClure from our previous episode had been following this case very closely, obsessing over every detail that made it into print. It was on October 25th, 1903, when Jesse McClure killed his own children, and only didn't kill his wife and stepdaughter because his wife had fled through a cornfield with her daughter in her arms. Alfred Knapp had been found guilty of the murder of his pregnant wife just 3 months before Jesse McClure attempted to annihilate his entire family.
Yep. So now he has had his own episode. We did it.
And he was likened to some other cases, which we will cover later.
Yes, there was one case that when he got arrested, when Alfred got arrested, he kept talking about Pearl Bryan. And so Olivia looked into that and again said she needs her own episode.
And then Hooper Young also needs his own episode.
They said Alfred had the cunning of Hooper Young. So also there's another one coming up.
But we're going to take a break and do a request, right?
Yes. Yeah. Kind of. An offer.
Yes. An offering to the public.
Yes. Yeah, Olivia found a post online where a person was posting about one of his ancestors who had, been in prison and I think died in prison, if I got that correct.
Maybe.
And anyway, so I told the guy, hey, you know what? I've got this podcast. I'll cover him for you. And so that's what we're going to do next.
Yay! Well, shout out to Christian. Shout out to newspapers.com, findagrave.com, ancestry.com, Family Search, Pixabay, Internet Archives. Follow our socials, Forgotten Felonies on Facebook, Forgotten_Felonies on Instagram and Threads. Send us an email to forgottenfelonies@gmail.com.
Yeah.
Or the link in the bio.
Yeah, what she said, all of that. And yeah, Christian, he's so great with his voices.
Shout out to traffic.
Yes, there were planes, trains, and automobiles, folks, that we had to pause for.
Also, go back and listen to the first episode all over again because we redid it.
Yes, we did, and it's really, really good. It's really good. I found more detail. So let me just explain. When we first started, we didn't go so deep into the research. And so as time has gone on and I've gotten very detailed, I felt bad. I felt like we did Joycey a disservice by not covering the case in full. And so we went back and added so much more detail. Like, it's awesome. And also, what was the other thing we were going to say? Oh, and we plugged in some old vintage ads as well, because we didn't start doing that until the 5th episode. But yeah, so we threw it in episode 1.
Maybe we'll redo the other ones.
They sound okay though, like sound-wise.
You could throw in ads though.
True. I could throw in ads.
Anyway, as per usual, I gotta use the bathroom.
Oh my gosh. Okay. What is with you and your bowels or your bladder or whatever it is this time?
It's usually a number 2.
Good to know. All right.
Okay.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.